For today's discussion, Ms. Jennifer June from Stockholm International Water Institute is joining us. We will listen to her speak about her role in one of the leading institutes in water governance and her extensive knowledge of environmental issues. Jennifer June is an international affairs professional with 15 years of experience in program management, research, external relations, and international justice and foreign policy. At SIWI, she is responsible for developing and managing SIWI's engagement in global climate and sustainable development processes. Her previous affiliations include the BMW Foundation Herbert Quandt, Chicago Council on Global Affairs, Aspen Institute, International Criminal Court, and IOM UN Migration. Jennifer holds an LLM in International and European Public Law from Tilburg University, a double MA in European Studies from Rijksuniversiteit Groningen and Universidad de Deusto, and a BA in Anthropology and Comparative Literature from the University of Pennsylvania. A U.S. national, she speaks English, Korean, French, and Spanish. Without making us wait any longer, I would love to give the virtual microphone to Jennifer. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very, very kind and generous introduction. And thank you, Bushra, for the invitation to speak with you all today. I look very much forward to getting to know all of you. So it's a pity that I have to be the one to start and kind of wait until the end of my own presentation to get to know you, but I look very much forward to it. And yeah, I look forward to learning from you guys as well. So I will start with a PowerPoint presentation, so give me a couple of seconds to just share that with you. And I believe I have to make my screen bigger so that you can see the full PowerPoint. Can everyone see it? If someone can give me a verbal yes, then I know that you can all see it.
You can see it.
It looks great on my screen.
Great, thank you. So yes, so I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about the topic of youth leadership in climate action. And for my presentation, it'll be a little bit about the water perspective, the water angle to climate. And I'll start with a video because some of my communications colleagues at SIWI have done a brilliant job of making a really nice video about SIWI, so I thought I would start there. So I'm going to attempt to play this YouTube video for you, and I really hope it works. Great. Was everyone able to see and hear the presentation properly?
Yes.
Great. Then I can move forward to the next slide. So the video, I think, did a very, very good job of giving you kind of in 1 minute what my organization SIWI is about, and some nice photos, videos, to give you a better sense of what we do. Where we are today, we're located in Stockholm. So I do live in Stockholm, Sweden. I am a US national. I'm originally from Chicago and moved 3 years ago to Stockholm to do the work that I do here with SIWI. And we're located in the city center in a very nice location in what used to be kind of an old government building in Stockholm. and we have some really nice offices, as you can see with the photo there. And I want to also give you a picture of where we started. There we go. So it was mentioned in the video very briefly that we started basically in 1991 as essentially a water festival. What that means is that the city of Stockholm wanted to find a way to kind of give the public a reason to celebrate, an occasion to celebrate the fact that Stockholm's waters actually used to be quite polluted. If you've ever visited Sweden, if you've ever visited Stockholm, you'll see today that, you know, all of the lakes, rivers surrounding the area, they're really, really pristine. They're really clean. You know, it's very common for people to take a dip, to take a swim, really, you know, wherever you see water, but this used to not be the case, actually. Sweden's and Stockholm's waters used to be quite polluted, and people were not encouraged to go and swim, you know, enjoy as kind of a public good. And once Stockholm found out a way to clean its waters and to really start encouraging people, you know, get in the water, let's really enjoy this precious resource, they wanted to organize this big festival. So that's like an old flashback photo from back in 1991, when SIWI was basically, that's our founding story. We began as a festival, and then we started kind of pulling in different components around the festival. There was a research institution. There was also a Stockholm Water Prize that was given out by the King of Sweden. So all of those elements came together to now form the organization that SIWI is today. What is SIWI? What is the Stockholm International Water Institute? It is a water institute that tries to do a couple of things under one umbrella. So on the one hand, we try to take science and bridge that. And I have a slide here of kind of what to us represents the science behind water. And sometimes you've probably heard the phrase hydrological cycle. It's the water cycle, how basically water moves through the environment. You know, when it rains, of course, that water comes down to the mountains. It can melt glaciers. Then it flows into lakes and rivers. That goes into the ocean. Some of that water also evaporates, goes back into the atmosphere, and then it can rain again. So there is a cycle, a circle of water that moves through the environment. And we take that science, we take that information, and we try to also bridge that to policy. So policy is a big word. And I've, you know, even though I've been working in generally in a policy space for about 15 years, I think I'm still learning. I'm still learning to figure out what that means and what we can do with policy. And generally, if I had to describe it, I think ultimately we want to change behavior. We want to change the behavior of important, you know, decision makers, leaders in society. Sometimes that means that we try to influence the behavior of governments. Sometimes it means that we try to influence the behavior of companies, corporations, NGOs, of, you know, students, of the elderly. So any kind of change we want to bring about, we try to use the tools available through research, through science, through advocacy, through, you know, convenings, meetings, conferences, speeches, etc., to get to that changed behavior. And I included here a photo that I'm really personally very proud of. The woman that you see in the photo, she's a team member of mine named Tove Lexen, and she was recently at a water conference hosted by the government of Tajikistan in a city called Dushanbe, where Tove was able to make a speech on behalf of our organization on the importance of youth when it comes to water and climate. So I'm really, really proud of what she was able to do at this very important conference. And that's one of the ways I think you can understand policy, is that, you know, through these different platforms, we get to make our voices heard, make our ideas and opinions heard, and hope that we can influence change for the better. So we try to combine science with policy, and of course with practice, with things, actions taken on the ground. So we hope, of course, that when we change the behavior of all of these different types of actors, that those things will lead to real impact on the ground. Here's a photo of a city that has decided that, hey, we can manage water, and water flows better in an urban context. So this is an example of what's called a sponge city, where they've put in a lot of they've used nature, a lot of green spaces. They've used really smart kind of urban planning to, when it rains too much or too little, the city can absorb and store that precious rainwater for future use. We also are known for something called World Water Week. So this is one of the largest water conferences in the world, taking place in Stockholm every August. And it's a massive, massive kind of conference that brings together all types of professionals, stakeholders, youth, practitioners, innovatives, to a very large space in Stockholm, and we get to exchange ideas, solutions on what we can do to tackle the water crisis and things like the climate crisis as well. So you've seen in the video the phrase water governance, and this is also quite a large, big concept. So I wanted to break it down a little bit and help put a little bit of flesh to the idea. So ultimately, it comes down to, water governance is about who gets what water, when, and how, and who has the right to water, its related services, and their benefits. And all of this is very important because the water that is in this phrase, water governance, that water that we're talking about, it is an extremely precious resource. Only about 2.5% of all of the water in the world is fresh water. And this, this might not, strike you as something that is really important, or maybe it doesn't cause any panic or, concern. But if you think about it, we need that fresh water to sustain us as human beings. We drink that water, we use that water for sanitation, hygiene, but also that water gets used by industries, to produce energy, to produce food, and last but not least, that fresh water is really needed by Mother Nature, by the environment, to basically keep the forests, the mountains, the landscape, as green, as healthy and lively as it is, as you see in the picture there. So we need essentially a lot of fresh water. We need good quality fresh water, and we need water, when we need it most. And unfortunately, that water that is available to us, it's a very small amount of water that's available on the planet. So here is where I'll try to tie in kind of what we discussed about water with climate change. And I thought, instead of giving you a very boring lecture about it, I'm going to also use here a really nice video that our colleagues at the UN have put together. So I will now play the video for you on the connection between water and climate change. Great. I hope you were also able to see and hear the video without any problem. So as the video very nicely illustrated, and at the very beginning of the video, it stated that, how we as human beings, we as societies, how we experience climate change. When people talk about climate change, how do we know that it's happening? How can we feel that it's happening? Well, if you really think about it, and you can even reflect on some of your own personal experiences with climate change, we really feel it through water mainly. And I say that because climate change means that there's often too little water. So in places around the world where they face droughts, climate change can mean that there's too much water. It rains too much. It rains too, suddenly. You get a flooding situation like, we recently saw in Germany. So that can also be a way that we feel climate change. It can also mean that the water is too dirty, right? So pollution, for example. So all of this kind of points to the very close relationship between water and climate. And that also means that when we start to think about solving the climate crisis, what can we do? Well, if we experience climate change through water, then there should be ways that we combat or we develop resilience. We can, help survive climate change through innovations found also in water. And so we at SIWI try to focus on those solutions. What are the solutions available? What are the innovations available through this framework that I introduced earlier of water governance, how we manage water to find ways that we can cope with, adapt to climate change. Okay. So here, I'll try to get to kind of what we can all do and what especially youth leaders like yourselves can do when it comes to water and climate change. So I wanted to list a couple of really, really concrete recommendations for you. And of course, you can always feel free to reach out to me afterwards to get more information about the things that I mentioned here in the presentation. So the first thing I wanted to highlight is something that we organize right here at SIWI, my organization. I have a team of colleagues that work on something called the Stockholm Junior Water Prize, which is absolutely brilliant. It's one of my favorite programs at SIWI. This is a global water prize that is open to any youth, any young person around the world. How it's organized is that each country tends to have kind of a national competition, and someone with a brilliant idea, solution, innovation to improving water governance, they can come forward, they can participate in this competition, and if you're selected as a finalist, then the committee usually brings you out to Stockholm to participate in the global Stockholm Junior Water Prize. And there, kind of based on the quality of your invention, innovation, idea, how practical it is, how innovative it is, then you can ultimately win this global prize. And the best thing I think about it is that you get to receive the prize from the Crown Princess of Sweden. It's also a very big deal in that, they set you up with organizations that can further mentor you, support your idea, help kind of incubate it and lift off afterwards. So it's a really, really great opportunity. I personally like to see it as, consider it kind of the Nobel Prize for water, but that is completely open and can really empower young leaders. So I've included the link to the Stockholm Junior Water Prize there. And I know for a fact that we have a really, really active network in the US and many of the countries that you represent on the call today. So if you're interested, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to the team that's responsible for it for more information about how you can participate. I wanted to also highlight a really exciting kind of new coalition that is emerging on the global scene. It's called UNIFY, and UNIFY stands for the United Nations International Federation of Youth for Water and Climate. And this is an effort to try to bring many different local organizations, global organizations of youth working on water and climate issues. They wanted to all kind of unify under one tent to really come together in a much more strong way. And they've got, lots of activities, lots of campaigns that are being shaped up right now, especially towards something called the UN 2023 Water Conference that is happening in New York. I'll talk a little bit more about it. So if you're interested in joining forces with other young leaders who are passionate about water and climate, and you have a passion for advocacy, for policy making, etc., for also helping to mentor or finding mentors through the network, I would really highly recommend that you reach out. And the easiest thing you can do is go to their website, and there is a link to join UNIFY as a member. So you should be able to do that very easily. One more idea that I wanted to raise is, of course, there's a very important climate change conference that the UN organizes every year called the COP. And the COP happens in different countries around the world every year. Last year, the COP was held in Glasgow in Scotland. And this year in November, this will be organized in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And at every COP, many youth organizations, but also a lot of civil society in general, women's organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, we all kind of show up in big numbers to make sure that our voices are heard, our ideas and our solutions are heard at the COP. And this is very important because what the COP does is officially bring together many different governments around the world to agree on common goals, standards, common understanding about how we get to a climate resilient net zero future as soon as possible. So these are very important government leaders that are meeting together on an annual basis. And as I mentioned, civil society organizations, including youth voices, they really try to show up and influence that decision making. And so if you're really passionate about climate and you want to be there in person, right at the heart of these processes, the COP is a fantastic platform to do that. And thankfully, there are many different youth coalitions that you can join. There are many NGOs through which you can travel to the COP in person or participate virtually. And so this is a super exciting opportunity. If you have the opportunity to ever join up on the road to COP, I would really recommend that you check out this opportunity. And finally, as I mentioned, there's a really important UN conference coming up in New York in March 2023. So it's just around the corner, really. It's in a couple of months. And this is going to be a historic conference. This is going to be the first ever water conference that's organized by the UN since 1977. So that was a long time ago. And I myself, I wasn't alive when that conference happened. And who knows, maybe there won't be another conference after 2023 on water. So I personally consider it kind of the one and only opportunity, the one and only chance we have to make a big splash and to really urge government leaders, the UN member states that will be at the conference, and all of the civil society organizations around to make sure that we all join forces and we make really strong progress on water-related goals, especially when they relate to the 2030 agenda. The 2030 agenda, if you haven't heard about it before, it's a set of 17 common goals that UN member states, governments have set. And they include, for example, SDG, Sustainable Development Goal number 6 on water. They include SDG 13 on climate. They have goals related to gender equality, to education, responsible consumption, etc. So we want to make sure that we achieve all of these goals. And at this particular conference, we want to make sure that the goals related to water are, we have a concrete action plan, that we have a plan to implement that plan and to come up with solutions as soon as possible, because 2030 is also right around the corner. It's just 7 years from now. So we need to make progress really, really urgently. And with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing my PowerPoint, and I'm really, really excited to take any questions or comments or stories that you want to share. And thank you so much for your patience in listening to what I have to say.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ms. June, for your very inspirational and informative speech. I learned a lot about the relationship between water and the climate, and I love the part of your speech where you talked about the bridge between science, policy, and practice, because I think a lot of the times we just talk about the bridge between science and policy, but not taking action, and I really think that's cool that you're working on that at SIWI, so kudos to you. As you said, if you have any questions for Ms. June, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute. Some students were asked to prepare questions, so if you guys have them, please don't be shy. Just unmute or put them in the chat.
Sarah, if there aren't any questions that kind of immediately pop up in people's minds, I'd love to ask all of you, just out of curiosity, have you heard of the 2030 agenda? Have you heard of the SDGs? Is this something that you would say among your peers in school, you talk about in school, your teachers have talked about? Just really curious how well known the SDGs are.
For me personally, they're not super well known at my school. I did have one English project where we worked on developing a proposal for the SDGs, so that was a cool class, but other than that, not too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, personally at school I never heard about that. Yes.
Very interesting. Was the person who is just speaking now, did I hear a French accent?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So in France, in your school in France, it was not,
Not
let's
too
say
much.
it's not, oh, you're not French.
Yes, but we never talk too much about this subject.
Aha, very interesting. Okay. Anybody else have an experience?
Yeah, actually, at my high school, we always have like a summit each year, like on a different global issue. And this past year's was the climate. So we did talk about the SDGs a bit during that summit.
Very interesting. And for those of you who, let's say you've never heard of this before, as you're listening to the presentation, what was your impression of, does this resonate with you? Does this make sense in any way? Or is it really confusing, actually?
It's not confusing because we on social media we yes, I learn about that, but not especially at school.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, and I see we have one more question for you in the chat, which is for Ms. June. What is your most memorable moment throughout your career or work within the global climate and sustainable development topics where you felt as though your voice was truly being heard and that you were making an impact?
Oh, thank you for that question. It's a really, really good question. I think I've had a lot of different kinds of moments where I felt really happy to be in this work. When Sarah, she introduced me at the beginning, you would have heard that, you know, in many ways, I am not a climate expert. I am not a water expert. This is not what I studied in school. This is not what I've done for the past 15 years, you know, straight in a row. I've done lots of different kinds of work, and none of them were directly really related to the environment. So I'm, in many ways, since joining SIWI, this is my first time working on environmental, climate, and water issues. And that said, I think I have many moments where I feel like, wow, I definitely chose a good, you know, path to go into, because I feel as though I'm not only benefiting, I'm not only, you know, helping people and people like myself. I sometimes think about my family a lot, my family in Chicago, my family in South Korea. I now have family in Tbilisi, Georgia. I think about all of the climate change impacts happening around them. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, hopefully I'm part of the solution and not part of the problem. So that makes me really happy. One example or one moment that I can specifically point to where I felt especially really grateful to be in this area of work is, as I mentioned, there's this big climate change conference that happens every year called the COP. And at the previous COP in Glasgow, I worked on essentially, it kind of started out as a small idea, a small dream of mine. As someone who's coming into this field, I realized that there were many, many organizations and many people working on water and climate issues, but oftentimes we were not necessarily talking to each other or coordinating or learning from each other. And so I decided to kind of plant the seed for what ended up being a coordination, kind of a coming together of all of these different organizations. And we were able to, for the first time ever in the history of the COP, have a joint water and climate pavilion. So we were able to have one common space where many organizations, you know, could come together and basically show a unified front. You know, we were united with our message that water is very, very important for climate. Water is part of the solution. That there's a lot of innovations to be found by water practitioners, water decision makers, to mitigate and adapt to climate. So that project to bring all of these different voices together, that was really a moment that made me very proud to be doing the work that I do.
Thank you for sharing. I see we have some other questions in the chat. The first one is from Kiala. What made you decide to shift into an environmental workspace?
Very good question. Just before starting this work, I was working more on the side of US foreign policy and national security, so more on kind of the political side of things. And I had always, you know, climate change, you've probably felt it too. It's more and more in the news. People are talking about it more and more. And already back then, I was starting to sense, wow, climate is really, it's a big deal. You know, even though I didn't study it, I wasn't directly, you know, I didn't have work experience related to it. But even someone like me, I could start to sense that this was going to be a big foreign policy, a big national security issue. So I was naturally very curious about it. And I had a moment in my career where I kind of had a pivot moment where I needed to move. And I thought, Sweden as a country has a really impressive track record of sustainability, environmental issues. And what other better place than Sweden to, for the first time, explore doing something related to the environment. So that's how I found SIWI, my organization, and that's how I started doing this work. And in some ways, it was a bit accidental, it was a bit serendipitous, but now I'm really, really happy that I'm doing this work.
Very cool. Next question is from Isabella. Are there any particular areas of the world that specifically need to be more focused on than others in terms of helping them develop their water safety?
Yeah, really, really good question. Part of me thinks that these water challenges and water, let's say climate challenges that manifest through water, this is actually everywhere. So just because many of us are kind of in the global north, we're in wealthier, more comfortable countries and cities around the world, it doesn't mean that we are safe from these impacts. And, as I mentioned before, in Germany, I don't know if any of you on the call are from Germany, when you saw the flooding events and you saw that even a very, very wealthy country in Europe like Germany, they suffered a lot of damage. A lot of people lost their lives, their livelihoods. So even in places like that, we are not out of harm's way. But in terms of, comparatively speaking, of course, I would say the areas in the world where they have, very serious, they experience serious impacts from climate change, and where they don't have enough resources, they don't have enough capacity, they don't have enough support, are of course countries in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia. I can think of, oftentimes in the news we hear about the situation in Bangladesh with flooding. We hear about droughts that happen in some of the African countries, Central Asia also. And because I'm from the US, of course, I'm sensitive to hearing in the news about the drought, and they call it aridification, more and more becoming a desert in places like California, Utah, Nevada, etc. That breaks my heart, because some of those states, some of those cities, I personally love, and I think they're beautiful, they're lovely to visit. So the thought that they're losing water and they're becoming more and more kind of unlivable places, that's really devastating. But overall, I would say really everywhere in the world, we are experiencing some kind of a water challenge. And it's important for us to bear that in mind.
Thank you. I really learned a lot from that answer. Also, Nathan has one more question in the chat. From the progress you've seen, how fast would you say the mentalities have evolved for the past few years, and in what way? A good or understanding way, or is it like the opposite, a bad and ignoring way?
I don't have a crystal ball on this. I don't know if kind of overall we've progressed or regressed backwards, but what I can say, and feel free to chime in, any of you, on this, my impression, if I have to really take myself out of this work and just watch the news, just kind of see what trends there are out there in the world, I sense that more and more people are aware of climate change. More and more people realize that we all have a role to play. Actions as simple as like turning off the tap water when you're brushing your teeth, to not using plastic as much, to maybe less people are traveling by plane, and instead traveling by train or bicycle or shared, transportation. So I sense that people's minds are slowly but surely changing towards just being more aware of these environmental issues. And hopefully when people's perceptions, their understanding changes, it means that we all start to act and make choices differently. And I would say, even if all of you on the call, even if we're not environmental activists or scientists or inventors, inventing the next solution to climate change, we all can do something to make an impact. And I would really encourage all of you, challenge all of you to really think, on a daily basis, what are the choices that I make, whether I'm aware of it or not? What are those choices? And, could I make a change in some of those choices? Could I consider maybe not eating meat for 1 day out of the week? Could I consider, like I said, taking the bus instead of driving somewhere 2 days a week? Do I really have to fly from, let's say, Chicago to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or can I consider taking the Amtrak instead? So there are a lot of these choices that we can make, and we all, thankfully, we have the power to make those choices.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. June. I agree with you. I think the power of daily choices is underestimated sometimes, but it definitely makes an impact on the climate.